how do we grow this influence of black leaders, men and women, that can represent our industry inside the ANC, inside the policy-making structures?
Get to grips with the digital environment, put together best practices, what works and what doesn't, very importantly.
In the project that we're doing in Bublele, we've created a linking bridge between those two little areas there. So it becomes a matter of just 10 minutes walk from one side to the other.
So my message to our CEOs and those chief investment officers is, where at the end of the day do you want to see your role?
So by treating all of our water back to a stage where we can bring it back into the process, we're in effect saving around about 35% of our water usage on site.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to greeneconomy.tv. My name is Gordon Brown. Today we have this week's edition of the Circular Economy Show, and we have some really special guests for you. We're speaking this week about circular economy and used engine oils. And we have a very special guest this week, Mbhele Nyeba. He's the CEO of the Rose Foundation. We have our standing guest on this particular show, our expert in circular economy, Chris Whyte. And we have our inquisitive, young, youthful mind, Nolwazi Mbhele, who is an environmental management student at CPAT. But before we get going and before we bring our guests on, I'd like to play a quick video which gives us some indication or some background about the Rose Foundation, which is Bublele's organization. Let's go ahead with that. Thank you.
When you are fixing a car, you will probably get oil and grease all over you. But used oil is really hazardous for your health, so clean it off quickly and use gloves when you work with used oil. It is also illegal to dump used oil because it can pollute our water and is toxic to humans, animals and plants. So handle and store used oil carefully and recycle it responsibly. The Rose Foundation is here to help you recycle used oil responsibly. Ask us for a sample to drain your used oil safely. Store your used oil correctly in large closed drums or plastic industrial containers. Once your used oil containers are full, call a Rose licensed collector to pick it up from you. If you only have a small quantity of used oil, you can take it to a larger motor service center to be stored for collection and recycling. Help our environment and start recycling used oil today. Contact the Rose Foundation to find out how we can assist you.
Right, what a pleasure. Let's bring our guests in at this point. Nolwazi, Chris, Bublele, very special welcome to all of you to the show this week. I'd like to move straight into the topic for today: circular economy and used engine oils, used lubricants and other oils. So firstly, we're talking about circular economy. I'd like to ask Chris, just by way of introducing the problem statement, if you like, as it affects used oils, used engine oils in particular. Where were we and where are countries that don't have these types of extended producer responsibility initiatives in place? Talk us through the typical movement of this particular hazardous substance through the value chain, and explain to us, some of the negative impacts that these kinds of oils will have if not handled correctly.
Thank you, Gordon, and hi to all the viewers, either live or streaming at a later stage. Yes, oil has been an issue for quite some time. We've known about the negative environmental impacts of oil in the environment. Many of you may have seen adverts on television that shows that a liter of oil can pollute 1 million liters of water. And as a water scarce country, it's one of our key issues and imperatives to ensure the quality of our water. So we've been using oil for a long time. Cars have been around for a long time. We've been servicing cars for a long time. But we never really had systems in place prior to 1994. There's always been a value for oil. So where it has been able to be collected, it has been collected, and it's been used as an alternative fuel through very rudimentary systems in the past. But the main focus is trying to see how we can look at creating an opportunity to collect more of that oil. The sad reality is that a lot of the sort of the backyard mechanics or the home mechanics would not have any solution for the oil, and they would simply pour it into the environment or down the storm drains. And that's obviously the worst thing that can happen. So the opportunity is to look at trying to bring together, from a voluntary perspective, if not a legal perspective, to drive oil into appropriately managed systems. So what's happened in the past is that we have had through the National Environmental Management Act and the National Environmental Management Waste Act, there are directives that are very specific about what happens with oil. So it cannot go into a regular landfill site. It does need to be separated. It does need to be properly managed. But that obviously is a difficult thing to control and police. And one needs a system where one can look at creating a value chain. And that's what circular economy is all about. Is how do we look at the problematic components that do have highly negative effects and bring those back into the circular economy. And some may argue that it might not be a fully circular economy because the reality is it's a lossy system, but it's better than it landing up in the environment, and there's value in it. And that's what the economy part is of circular economy. So that's why we're really glad to have Bublele here to give us the information in terms of what they are doing.
No, what a pleasure. And so, Mbhele, over to you. I'd like you to, if you wouldn't mind, just give us an introduction to the Rose Foundation, and in so doing, perhaps also just comment on or expand on the environmental challenge that the Rose Foundation was ultimately organized to try to avoid. So over to you, please. If you can give us that intro and just expand on what Chris was saying about the environmental impacts, please.
Yeah, thanks, Gordon. So the Rose Foundation is an organization set up by the lubricant manufacturers, companies, and importers way back in 1994, and it is therefore the oldest extended producer responsibility company in South Africa, and it is the only such organization in the rest of the continent. Now, the reason behind the formation of the Rose Foundation was a recognition that if left and not addressed, used oil could be thrown away in ways that would be detrimental to the environment, that it could pollute water, it could pollute our soil, it could just be, or it could even hurt individuals, because one of the properties of used oil is that it can have what is called a carcinogenic effect, which is it could cause skin cancer if not handled properly. So we were set up as an organization to organize that the oil is collected, transported, stored, recycled in an environmental proper manner, and is also handled in the right way by the people who collect it, so that they don't have, for example, long-lasting negative impact on their own health as people who handle the product, and to provide a central point of contact for the members of the public, or people or workshops, and anybody who might have oil and don't know what to do with it. So we there to be that point of contact to advise and to direct oil, what needs to happen with oil.
Yeah, no, thanks very much. And so, I mean, just let's be clear, we're talking here about engine oil. We're not talking about used cooking oil, just to straighten that point out. But Mbhele, just to that end, I mean, so we all drive around in these internal combustion motor cars. Car needs a service. we pop into the service provider, they change the oil, they change the oil filter and so forth. That's one of your key sources of used oil. Perhaps expand on that, but also tell us what other sources are there? Who else is collecting or ends up with vast amounts of used oil?
Yes, thanks, Gordon. So those workshops where the oil is found, we call them in our industry, we call them the generators of oil. So they will be found in a workshop, in a motor, in a typical motor service workshop. It could be found in the mines. It could be found, on a construction site where there are construction vehicles, because sometimes the construction vehicles are in the hinterland. They could be in Karoo, and the service workshop is in Cape Town, 500 kilometers away. So an oil change happens. So you find an oil really wherever an oil change takes place. That could be at a taxi rank. Sometimes it could be at home. In all various contexts, and so that oil needs to be taken somewhere. So we've got a whole host of collectors in the country, every part of the country. If you find yourself with oil and you don't know how you can dispose of it, there is a collector of oil that would firstly help you to get rid of that oil by giving it to them, and in turn they would give you a safe disposal certificate. So if the environmental affairs came in and said, so what happened to the waste, to the oil waste, you can show that the oil was taken by somebody who's accredited, and there's a trace about where that oil ended up in a proper recycling facility. So that's really the high level value chain.
Yeah, no, thanks for that. So I'd just like to bring Nolwazi in at this point. Nolwazi, is there any question from your side that springs to mind?
Okay, so my question is, although the world is moving towards electric cars, we still have cars that use engine oil. Does the government have regulations on oil producers, car manufacturers, or end users in South Africa?
I missed that last bit of what does the government, you were asking what does the government do, what, Nolwazi?
Does it have regulations? Like, does it do something to prevent like a negative impact on the environment?
Yeah, no, it does. So, so it does. So firstly, used oil is, so in the waste sector, there are broad categories where waste is classified as. So there will be general waste, there will be household waste, there will be hazardous waste. So oil happens to be classified as hazardous waste. So if you transport waste, for example, so there are minimum thresholds about how much you can store before you require a license. If you transport it, there are minimum requirements about what you should have. For example, if you transport oil, and if you transport over 1,000 liters of oil, you have to have a dangerous goods permit. So nobody is allowed to transport oil or of larger quantities without a particular permit. Nobody is allowed to recycle the oil without a waste management license. So yes, there are guidelines, there are laws about how to handle the oil.
Thank you.
Chris, go ahead from your side, please.
Yeah, I think it's important just to note again that we're talking about synthetic oils, not organic oils. So if you've got some old chip fat oil, there's somebody else you can contact for that. There's other opportunities there. Obviously, we can't mix them. So the processing for synthetic oils is very different to the processing for organic oils. But there's a great opportunity in terms of trying to drive this forward. And I think the important thing is what the Rose Foundation brings forward, and importantly from a voluntary perspective, is that the supply is created, there's a value that's created in the supply. that makes it worthwhile for collectors to register as collectors, to link into the system. They're given the training on how to handle these goods. They're given a whole host of guidelines in terms of creating their own little side businesses from collecting oil. So I don't know if Bublele has any details in terms of the number of jobs it's created, but it is significant. And that's important for us to note, is that, looking at the voluntary component is taking a problem and finding a solution and using an extended producer responsibility opportunity to create a value chain. And obviously, what I want to try and get out from Bublele is kind of, where are we at the moment? How, we must have some idea as to how much oil is used in the country and how much we potentially collect and how much we need to collect as a percentage, and what the opportunities are in terms of increasing that percentage, whether we need to look at a regulated or gazetted EPR to widen the net beyond just the voluntary network, or if it's a reasonably small sector that is easier to handle through a voluntary network without getting complicated government legislation, and what future there is for the development and growth of the organization.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. So if we can start off maybe commenting about the employment aspect of it, or job creation of the value chain. So, the country has over 200 independent collectors that are self-employed, but each of that collector will have an assistant, and there will be an administrative system. So you can times just on the collection side, the economic job creation impact at least by 3, so about 600 give or take. And on the processing side, which is the recycling plants, they on average will have about 20 people. Just an average. Some of the smaller ones have less, and the bigger ones have more. So and we've got about 20 of them in the country. So another 20 times 20. There. So there is definitely a value add in terms of much needed jobs and creating an earning potential for people. So that's a big thing that we focus on as well. On the environmental side of things, on the legislation side of things, there are talks underway now with government to convert what we have, which is a voluntary, into a compulsory, mandatory scheme. So those talks are underway, and with government to go in a similar way that the paper and packaging and the electronic waste and the lighting waste streams have gone, because now they have been mandated to put together extended producer responsibility schemes that are accountable to government. So we are in those conversations now with the Department of Forestry, Fisheries and Environment to look at how our scheme could also become mandatory as opposed to voluntary. And we think that process, that whole mandatory system will kickstart in 2022.
Bublele, I just wanted to ask you to talk us through this full circle of how the Rose Foundation deals with the used engine oil. So we've spoken about the sources of the oil. You and Chris have touched on now the role of the collector. These are micro business people who go to the service stations and so forth and collect the oil. Who do they give it to, and what do they do with it? And how do we ultimately close this circle?
Yeah. So if I can just give a round view of the oil from the beginning. So the oil comes from, or the lubricant comes from a base material. It's called base oil, which is the raw material that you mix with additives to produce a lubricant. So that lubricant is then put into a vehicle, and the vehicle drives for, say, 15,000 kilometers, and then goes into a service workshop. That oil is drained, it's collected, as I mentioned, it's taken into a recycling facility, and a couple of interesting things happen. So there are different end products out of that, and from a circular economy point of view, the used oil can be treated or cleaned in so much high quality that it can become new oil, so it can close off the loop. And in South Africa, about 10% of the oil go the full cycle of starting off as base oil and ending off as base oil. But the 90% goes into different functions. Some of them are quite small but interesting. Some of them are large, and the majority of the oil goes into what we call fuel oil or industrial heating oil, which is used in applications where there's a need for heating purposes. For furnaces, for example, for kilns in brick manufacturing industries, for boilers for burners in the asphalt industry. So those are the segments, or even in the sand drying industry. So you find that a majority of the oil ends up in those environments. And then there are some small niche areas where the oil ends up. For example, just an interesting one is that virtually every newspaper you will read in this country, it's got oil in it. The black ink in the used oil in a newspaper is black ink mixed with used oil to give it that feel of not being powdery and coming off the newspaper. So there are some interesting uses, as well as the mold release functions in tire manufacturing. So there are quite some interesting uses of oil, and I can tell you that in the country there are so many uses of used oil that we just don't have enough of it. As a result, we import used oil from neighboring countries like Swaziland, Botswana, Lesotho. There's just not enough of the oil in the country for all we can use it for.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'm going to go to Chris in a moment and ask him to talk about his understanding of some of the complexities in this process of converting waste oil back into value, as he has some deep insights in that respect. But before we go to Chris, Nolwazi, are there any burning questions from your corner at this point?
So I want to ask, can ordinary people do something with used oil?
Nolwazi, it's not advised that you do something with used oil in a sense of let's say that at home someone is able to drain oil from a vehicle, and that oil is used for something else. It's not advised that happens. That's why we're here to assist when people want to dispose of that oil, because you can handle it incorrectly. For example, you can't throw it down the drain, for example. So it's not advised that you. But what is advised, though, from a young person's point of view, is we can assist you in, if you're interested in. So how do I become a collector, for example? How do I play a role in this economic value chain? So that conversation with the youth is quite important to us.
Yeah, great. Chris, can I bring you in just perhaps talk about, as we discussed, some of the challenges, some of the more technical challenges that might affect the process of beneficiating used oil from your perspective?
Sure, I think one of the most complex ones is people like Nolwazi wanting to see what they can do with it at home. It's classified as hazardous for a reason. So rather give it to people who are trained on how to deal with it. And again, the oil game is a volumes game. The same with anything in the recycling industry. The reality is that and Bublele certainly put his finger on the issues, is that we were going to call this engine lubricants, and I think a lot of people don't know what an engine lubricant is, but it is basically what he said. It's a base oil that is changed to a specific requirement. So if you're taking your vehicle into the garage, you're either going to put in a petrol-based lubricant or a diesel-based lubricant. And for those of you who look at motor engines, there are two-stroke oils and other components. So there's a wide range of lubricants. The opportunity in terms of circular economy is to look at bringing it back to a base oil. So what happens when you put that oil into your car, you'll see it looks nice and golden and syrupy. When it comes out of your car, it looks black and nasty and horrible. So there are heavy metals in some of these components. There are sulfur applications in there. There are lubrosity agents. There are all sorts of other different products in there that need to be taken out to bring it back to a base oil. And there are different technologies for that. Thin film evaporation, pyrolysis. There's different applications in terms of converting that fuel back to its base oil, where it can then be used again back into the system and added, the right additives added to it. The problem that we face also is understanding, and I can see why Bublele has been trying to avoid the question, because we know how much oil is coming into the market, and it's difficult to understand how much we're collecting as a percentage of that, because there's a lot of losses in the system. And you may know of that if you have a truck like mine that leaks like a sieve. And you end up having to fill it up with oil all the time. So you're not able to capture the whole lot. Oil is burnt off. Oil leaks. So there is a lot of it already getting into the environment, which is unfortunate. And that really is just a case of management. The simple fact is that my truck would cost me another 20,000 Rand to put a head gasket on it. So yeah, $20 worth of oil a month is a lot cheaper than a 20,000 Rand head gasket. And that's where a lot of people think. But it is a lossy system. So we can't look at what's coming in versus what's there. It's not like a PET bottle. It doesn't weigh the same when it's full as when it's empty. So we've got to look at those aspects of it. But there are good technologies around. What we want to try and do as a country is to increase the value chain. So as opposed to using some of these oils for a low-grade, low-cost burning medium, let's rather look at seeing if we can take it up the value chain, back into a base oil or into another product. So there's a lot of market for it. As Bublele mentioned, we've got the burners, the guys who are using boilers. The cement industry also looks at using it as an alternative fuel, as an offset to coal. So there are many applications for it, but it's a very low value. What you want to try and do in terms of transitioning our economy to a circular economy or a more circular economy is to look at increasing the value of that product up the value chain. And that's really where the focus needs to come from. That needs infrastructure, it needs investment, but the more value you can create in the system, the greater the opportunity. The key component to this is that, and again, Bublele is talking about maybe looking at a gazetted EPR to try and widen the net and bring everybody into it. But they've already created a system where they create a value. So a small collector can make a very reasonable income collecting oils, and we don't really know how much is out there. People who understand what old oil is will be able to see if there's an opportunity from a volumes perspective to become a collector. And they're welcome to contact the Rose Foundation if they wish to do so. So the idea is to increase the collection and to decrease whatever is getting thrown into the environment, either directly into our storm drains, which happens very often, or into our landfills, or straight into the environment. But the technologies are there, the opportunities are there. I think what the Rose Foundation has done in terms of creating that value chain from the collection point is a vital first step. There is a flourishing industry in terms of using those oils I'm pretty sure that they don't have any problems getting rid of the product, but we need to take it up the value chain. And I think that would be the next step in terms of taking the circular economy journey.
What a pleasure. Thanks from your side, Chris. So that's all the time we really have for today, folks. We've reached the end of our time lot. But before we leave, before we finish up, I'm going to give Bublele the last word. I'm going to ask Bublele, please, from your position as CEO of the Rose Foundation, what's your vision? What are the most important things on your desk for the next, let's say, the next 6 months to a year? And how do you see the near future and the distant future, perhaps from a point of view of taking these hazardous waste materials that are coming through the engine lubricants value chain and turning them back into value? Over to you, Bublele, to finish us off. Thank you.
Yeah, so if I can just touch base on what Chris mentioned. So we have a good handle on the new oil that's placed into the market. Is about 350 million liters, and about 40% of that becomes old oil. And in the more developed world, it's about 50%. In Europe, about 45%. So because of a lot of the seepage and people putting in oil and going to neighboring countries, so we think that's about what you can get out of the oil that's put out there. In terms of how the success rate, I mean, we can easily account for 100 million liters of oil in South Africa, of people that are registered with us and some other people that may not be registered with us, but we are aware of. But yeah, but in terms of the journey, as Chris said, you want to move towards a cleaner end product. So I mentioned earlier on that only 10% of the oil is converted into base oil. And in Europe, their 2020 goal was to have 80% of the oil converted into base oil. We are still sitting on 10%. So for us, really the in terms of circular economy is to at least double that 10% into say 20%, within the next few years. So that's really to drive and influence the correct technologies. So that you produce more base oil, because there are advantages, because you don't have to import the base oil if you make it locally, and it's got those kinds of spin-offs. Thank you, Gordon.
Thanks very much indeed, Bublele. So, ladies and gentlemen, if you want more information on this super important topic, check out rosefoundation.org.za. You can find all the information you need there. Contact Bublele and his team, and they'll give you all the feedback you need, whether you want to be a collector, a processor, or whatever role you're interested in playing, or if you just want information, get hold of them at the Rose Foundation, doing an excellent job. For more information about circular economy, tune into this show every week, 1 o'clock every Wednesday, and also check out greeneconomy.media, the website hosting this channel. Loads of information there available to you. Our next show, next Wednesday, 1 o'clock, topic will be announced on the website in the very near future. So at this point, I'd like to say thank you very much indeed to the panel, to Bublele, to Chris, and to Nolwazi. Thanks very much indeed for your participation. And that's all from us. Goodbye for now, folks.
When you are fixing a car, you will probably get oil and grease all over you. But used oil is really hazardous for your health, so clean it off quickly and use gloves when you work with used oil. It is also illegal to dump used oil because it can pollute our water and is toxic to humans, animals, and plants. So handle and store used oil carefully and recycle it responsibly. The Rose Foundation is here to help you recycle used oil responsibly. Ask us for a sample to drain your used oil safely. Store your used oil correctly in large closed drums or plastic industrial containers. Once your used oil containers are full, call a Rose licensed collector to pick it up from you. If you only have a small quantity of used oil, you can take it to a larger motor service center to be stored for collection and recycling. Help our environment and start recycling used oil today. Contact the Rose Foundation to find out how we can assist you.